So John, today you've been appointed the new chairman of Westpac, the latest chapter in a more than 40-year career in financial services. But this role obviously comes at a particularly difficult time for the bank amid the AUSTRAC matter. Talk us through how you approached the decision to take on the role.
Well, I was approached by the chairman relatively recently to see if I could become interested in the role. I was quite surprised because I didn't really expect it, because I'd sort of generally made it known that 50 years working full-time is a big slog, and therefore maybe I needed some time to do something different. But it was interesting, having spent now time in the garden, as it speaks, I suddenly realized that I didn't have enough to do. And so he hit me at the right moment. And actually I did then reflect very seriously on it. Look, I know Westpac really well over a long period of time. David Morgan and I were enormous competitors, but we were always great friends. We still are. Of course, he's been in London, where I've been recently. So there seems to be an inevitability about this, which is why it happened so quickly. In that I needed a challenge, Westpac needed a seasoned chairman, and ideally with banking experience, and it was a perfect marriage. And that's why it happened so quickly.
And like you said, recently spent a lot of time in London at Barclays, and originally from Scotland. Yeah. So have you now relocated back to Australia?
Yeah, I came back because I finished mid-year from my city responsibilities and the Barclays responsibilities. But I didn't come back to Australia until October, intending to really balance my life between here and Europe and North America, because I've got 3 daughters and grandchildren, 2 in London and 1 in LA. And so it was going to be that sort of lifestyle. Of course, you can't be chairman of Westpac and continue to do that. And therefore, so we've now moved back to Melbourne.
And you're an external appointment. So from the outside looking in, what's your perception on the things that have gone wrong, or the drivers that have contributed to where the bank is currently?
Well, remember, I'm not on the board. And so I'm not the most informed person to ask that question. But that said, I've obviously done quite a bit of thinking and research about it. The thing about appointments, there are strengths and weaknesses about internal appointments and external appointments. With an internal appointment, the people know the company really well. And therefore, if they make changes, they don't throw out the good things because they know what they are. They actually eliminate the things that are not so good. But with an external, you gain new perspective, but you also get a different level of insight onto the strengths and weaknesses of the company. Look, I'm not concerned about a challenge. Every single major financial institution I've been with has been in some form of turnaround and a major reshaping. Westpac isn't in that position from its core business standpoint, but it is from its compliance standpoint, and therefore, it will require a significant amount of change. We have to fix what's gone wrong, we have to make good, and now we have to make sure it just doesn't happen again.
And in terms of other immediate priorities or focus, I imagine appointing a permanent CEO is pretty high on the list as well.
In every position, particularly the CEO, if you feel that you've got a good candidate but not a brilliant candidate, you should not move on that, and you should just park it and continue until the best person in the world is available to you. And the good thing about a bit of time is you get to know the internal candidates really well. Whereas if you move too quickly on that, they don't have the same opportunity. So I do think there are benefits, and these things take time because A, you've got to find the right person, B, you've got to persuade them to do it, and then they've got to be released. If they're an external person, it's easier if it's an internal person. So I think time is actually quite useful.
And you brought up transformations in your experience there. At ANZ, I think when they came out of the early 90s recession, there was obviously some pretty hard times, and you oversaw quite a transformation there. And one of the aspects of it was to do with Breakout, which was around cultural change. Do you think something similar is needed at Westpac?
The agenda is always shaped by the state of the firm as you find it and inherit it. So both Westpac actually and ANZ had a very difficult time in the early 90s. And essentially the 1992 to 97 period was all about recovering from that. And so that was a period, but it also shows you how long it takes you to recover from a difficult situation. But I think the key thing here is the perspective must be on long-term success, not on maximizing short-term profits. And that means that it's long-term returns commensurate with acceptable short-term outcomes. And so finding that balance between the long and the short is really quite important, with a heavy bias towards the long.
And in terms of that long, do you think there's a good base to work with and the strategy at the moment is on the right course?
Well, the strategy has proven incredibly valuable at Westpac. It's interesting, if you take the core businesses of Westpac, the very large core businesses, they've all got very good market positions in their sectors. And particularly the retail business, which actually benefited from the acquisition of St. George. If you recall, ANZ benefited from the acquisition of the National Bank of New Zealand. And interesting, if you look at major shifts in market share in retail banking in Australia over long periods of time, very little of that came from organically. Most of the big moves came from mergers or acquisitions. And so the decisions that were taken, although dilutive at the time, were very good long-term decisions. That meant that strategy has ended up in a really, really good place from a business standpoint. But the thing about strategy is that the environment changes. And you need to anticipate that environment and make whatever changes are necessary. You're always better to lead into tomorrow rather than get dragged into it as the environment changes. And so strategy is always under review, but not every year, but it's always under review because you do need to evolve it. And I just have a firm belief that companies that like Westpac, it's the big things done well that really matter. Focus on the long term and make sure you're only in sectors where you're truly distinctive, and then you win.
And just lastly, you obviously left ANZ 2007. A lot has changed in Australian banking since then. I'm interested in what you think is the biggest issue now and going forward, because I think I read a few years ago you talked about how you're a bit ashamed with where the reputation of bankers is at. How do you repair something like that, and is that the key challenge at the moment?
Well, it's déjà vu, because when I inherited ANZ, and then after that David inherited Westpac, banks were hated by society. It was an election issue every time, and of course the banks put it there because of short-term thinking. In order to fix these problems, you have to fix the industry. And you have to do it collectively. And if you can't get consensus collectively, you have to embarrass the industry so it has no choice. And so what we did, it was either David or me, and I can't remember which order it was, because we were successive chairmen of the Australian Bankers Association. We engaged with the NGOs. And we said to them, we can't fix all of your criticisms. So you get together and you tell us which 2 or 3 are the most important, and we'll commit to fix them. It might take us a while, but we will do it. So if you can change the industry, and be good citizens, then it actually makes life so much more enjoyable, because being hated by society is not a good leading indicator of future success.
Thanks for joining us, John.